They kept dumping their snow on my land like I was invisible, like my fence didn't matter, like I didn't matter. I asked, I warned, I even showed them the maps, the flood lines, the truth. They laughed, said it was just snow. So I built a wall 10 feet tall, cold, silent, immovable, and when the blizzard came, that wall stood, but their side collapsed. Her garage caved in under the very snow she forced onto me. They tried to blame me, sue me, break me, but the truth doesn't melt under pressure. It freezes, it remembers, and when it finally thaws, it exposes everything. The first snowstorm of the season arrived without drama. No warnings on the radio, no frantic knocking on doors. It simply came in during the night, laying down a clean, even blanket across Ridgepoint Valley. By morning, the neighborhood looked peaceful. Pines bowed gently under the weight. Rooflines wore smooth white caps. The road curved through the valley like a ribbon drawn carefully by hand. Victor Howland noticed all of this as he always did, slowly, thoughtfully. Snow had never been something he ignored. For more than 20 years, it had been his job to understand it. Not just how it fell, but how it settled, how it shifted, how something that looked harmless in the morning could become dangerous by afternoon. He had retired from avalanche risk assessment 3 years earlier, after his wife Sarah passed away during a long winter illness. Retirement had not been a celebration, it had been a retreat. Ridgepoint Valley was meant to be quiet, predictable, safe. That was the promise. Victor had chosen the house carefully, a modest structure at the edge of the cul-de-sac. Nothing flashy, no dramatic views that tempted trouble, just trees, slope and space. Most importantly, it had clear boundaries. That morning he poured his coffee, stood at the kitchen window, and watched the HOA plow begin its rounds. The sound came first, a low mechanical growl rolling through the stillness. Victor didn't mind the noise, he understood its purpose. Snow removal mattered, especially here. The plow moved steadily down the road, blade angled, pushing snow toward the curb. Clean work, efficient. Victor nodded once, approvingly. Then the plow reached the end of the cul-de-sac. Instead of lifting the blade and turning back, it slowed. The blade tilted, and a heavy load of snow slid off, not onto the common verge, not into the designated runoff area, but straight onto the eastern edge of Victor's property. The sound was dull and final, a thick, wet thud. Victor frowned. He set the mug down and stepped outside. The air was sharp, clean. His breath rose in pale clouds as he walked toward the boundary line. The pile wasn't small. It stretched nearly 15 feet along the fence, packed tight from road compression. The orange fiberglass boundary markers he'd installed the previous fall were gone, buried completely. Victor knelt and brushed away snow with his gloved hand until he found one of the rods bent at an angle, cracked near the base. That wasn't accidental. He straightened slowly and followed the plow's path with his eyes. At the far end of the cul-de-sac stood Karen Langley, hands on hips, red scarf knotted tight, watching. Karen had lived in Ridgepoint Valley longer than Victor. She was efficient, organized, and absolutely certain she was right. She had been HOA treasurer for 3 years. Recently, she had taken on winter operations as well. Not officially, just because no one stopped her. Victor walked toward her at an unhurried pace. "Morning," he said evenly. Karen turned, her expression already set into that practiced, polite smile. "Victor, beautiful snowfall, isn't it?" "It is," he agreed, "but the plow just dropped a full load onto my property." Karen glanced briefly toward the pile, then back at him. "The snow has to go somewhere," she said. "We're keeping the roads clear. Safety first." Victor nodded once. "I understand that. But that pile is on my land." Her smile tightened slightly. "It's just snow. It'll melt." Victor considered his words carefully. Compacted snow didn't melt the way people thought it did. It redirected water. It changed pressure patterns. It saturated soil unevenly. He had seen retaining walls fail under less, but this wasn't a lecture. Not yet. "I'd appreciate it if it didn't happen again," he said calmly. Karen's smile flickered, just for a moment. "I'll make a note of it." That was the end of the conversation. Victor returned to his house, boots leaving deliberate tracks across the yard. Inside, the silence felt heavier than before. Ellie had already left for school. At 16, she had grown used to quiet mornings since her mother passed. Victor worried about that silence sometimes, worried it settled too deeply. He stood at the window again, looking at the snow piled where grass and pine needles should have been visible. It wasn't anger he felt. It was unease. That afternoon, Victor pulled an old notebook from a drawer, the one he hadn't opened since retirement. He wrote down the date, the time, the approximate dimensions of the pile. He took photographs, wide shots, close-ups, the bent boundary rod. He wasn't planning a fight. He was preparing for clarity. The second dump came 2 days later. Victor was clearing his driveway when he heard the plow approaching again. This time, he didn't wait. He stood at the edge of his property and watched. The plow slowed at the same spot. The blade tilted. Another load slid off, larger than the first. The snow pressed hard against the split-rail fence, burying the lower beam completely. Victor didn't shout. He didn't wave. He lifted his phone and recorded. The driver glanced toward Karen's house, hesitated, then continued. Ellie stepped onto the porch, pulling her coat tighter. "They did it again," she said. Victor nodded. That evening, he measured depth and density. The snow was already hardening, blue ice forming at the base. For water from earlier sunlight had seeped into the soil and refrozen overnight, lifting the ground unevenly. Victor marked it all down. The third dump came after a heavier storm. This one broke a fence post clean through. Ellie watched from the window as Victor stood silently, hands on hips staring at the damage. "Are you going to say something?" she asked quietly. "I already did," he replied. She frowned. "They're not listening." "No," Victor said. "They're testing." From that day forward, Victor documented everything. He walked the boundary after each storm. He measured. He photographed. He logged temperatures. He installed a small trail camera behind the shed, not hidden, just unobtrusive. He reread the HOA covenants that night, slowly. Most residents skimmed those documents. Victor studied them. Section 6.4 stood out. No snow or storm debris shall be deposited upon private lots without express owner consent unless declared an emergency by county authorities. There had been no emergency, no consent. Victor closed the binder and leaned back in his chair. The HOA newsletters began arriving soon after. Glossy pages, smiling families, reminders about community cooperation during winter operations. At the monthly potluck, Karen spoke at length about shared sacrifice, about how everyone had to give a little during difficult seasons. Her eyes passed over Victor more than once. He didn't respond. He didn't need to. The pressure was building, slowly, invisibly, just like snow does. Victor knew one thing with certainty. If he reacted emotionally, he would lose ground. If he reacted patiently, the truth would surface on its own. That night, he stood at the window again, looking at the growing ridge along his boundary. The valley was quiet, but it was no longer peaceful. Something had shifted, and Victor understood storms well enough to know this was only the beginning. Stops working. Winter settled into Ridgepoint Valley, the way it always did after the first storms, slowly, persistently, without asking permission. The snow no longer felt new, it felt heavy. Victor noticed the change before most people did. The way the drifts no longer sparkled in the morning light. The way footsteps left crisp edges instead of soft impressions. The way meltwater lingered longer each afternoon before freezing again at night. Snow remembered pressure, so did people. The HOA plow continued its routine. Each storm followed the same pattern. The road cleared, the cul-de-sac cleaned, and Victor's eastern boundary received its share. By the end of the second week, the pile along his fence line had become a ridge, not natural, not shaped by wind, shaped by machinery. It pressed outward now, leaning against what remained of the fence, like a slow, patient weight. Victor replaced 2 cracked posts himself. He worked quietly, methodically, resetting them deeper, reinforcing the base with gravel and tamped soil. Ellie helped by handing him tools and holding the flashlight when dusk came early. Neither of them spoke much while they worked. They didn't need to. Inside the house, the atmosphere had changed. Ellie moved more carefully. She checked the window before sitting down to do homework. Victor noticed, and it bothered him more than the damaged fence. This was supposed to be their safe place. One evening, Victor drafted an email. It was polite, brief, clear. He cited the dates, the locations, the relevant covenant clause. He sent it to the HOA board, not just Karen. The response came the next day. Not from the board, from Karen. She thanked him for his feedback. She assured him winter operations were challenging. She reminded him that community living required flexibility. She did not deny the dumping. She did not acknowledge the damage. She closed with a line that lingered in Victor's mind longer than the rest. We trust residents will not take unilateral action that disrupts neighborhood harmony. Victor read the sentence twice. Then he archived the email. The next HOA newsletter arrived 2 days later. It included a new section titled Winter Compliance Reminders. No names were mentioned, but the language was clear. Unforeseen modifications, obstructions, visual disruptions, potential fines. Ellie read it over his shoulder. "Is that about us?" she asked. Victor folded the page carefully. "It's about control," he said. "Not us." The third week brought heavier storms. This time, the snow piled high enough to press against the cedar siding of Victor's tool shed. The structure groaned faintly at night as temperatures dropped and the mass hardened. Victor installed a small wooden brace inside the shed, just in case. He added more notes to his log. Measurements now included density readings, water content estimates. He wasn't angry, but he was no longer waiting. The breaking point came quietly. It arrived in the form of a yellow notice tucked under the windshield wiper of his truck. HOA violation warning, unapproved boundary obstruction observed. Resident advised to restore original conditions. Victor stood in the driveway holding the paper, the wind tugging at its edges. "Dad?" Ellie asked from the porch. He handed it to her. She read it slowly, then looked up. "They did this," she said, "and now they're blaming you." Victor nodded. Yes, that night he didn't open his notebook. Instead, he opened the garage. He pulled down old equipment he hadn't used in years, not out of anger, out of familiarity. Plywood sheets, rebar lengths, a compacting tamper. Ellie watched from the doorway. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Planning," Victor said. He slept better than he had in weeks. The idea didn't arrive fully formed. It built slowly, like everything else in Victor's life. If snow was being forced onto his land, then snow would become the solution. Not pushed back, contained, redirected, engineered. The next morning, Victor stood at the boundary line before sunrise. The air burned his lungs. The snow underfoot creaked with each step. He studied the ridge, the slope, the pressure points. Then he began. He didn't shovel the snow away. He reshaped it. He cut clean blocks, using a snow saw, stacked them carefully, tamped each layer until the crystals locked together. Between layers, he poured thin streams of water, letting the cold fuse everything into solid mass. Ellie brought him hot tea and watched silently. "It's like you're building something," she said. "I am," Victor replied. "A boundary." By the end of the first day, the structure stood shoulder high, straight, clean-edged. It didn't look angry. It looked intentional. Neighbors slowed as they passed. No one said anything. The second day, Victor continued. The wall rose higher. He reinforced the core with rebar driven deep into the frozen ground. Drainage channels were carved at the base, guiding meltwater safely downhill. This wasn't a protest. It was infrastructure. By the third day, the wall reached 8 feet. Karen noticed. She stood on her porch, arms crossed, watching from across the cul-de-sac. Victor waved once. She did not return it. That evening, another email arrived. This one copied the full board. It cited aesthetic concerns, safety considerations, unauthorized structures. Victor forwarded it to his documentation folder. Ellie read it and shook her head. "They're scared," she said, "of losing control." Victor agreed. The wall reached 10 feet on the 4th day. Smooth, solid, quiet, it stretched the full length of the boundary, a pale monolith rising from the yard. Children stared at it from the sidewalk. One neighbor gave a cautious thumbs up. Karen sent one final message. "Failure to remove this obstruction may result in further action." Victor didn't reply. The first heavy blizzard arrived that weekend. Snow fell without pause for 18 hours. The wall caught it all. On Victor's side, the snow stacked neatly, contained, stable. On the HOA side, the displaced snow piled high against Karen's retaining wall and garage. Victor watched from his window as wind drove flakes sideways, testing every surface. The wall did not move. The next morning, silence returned. Victor stepped outside. The wall stood firm, unmarked. Across the line, Cracks had begun to form in the concrete. He wrote it all down. He didn't smile. He didn't feel victorious. He felt prepared. Because when pressure builds long enough, something always gives. And Victor knew it wouldn't be him.
The wall changed the rhythm of Ridgepoint Valley. Not all at once. Not loudly, but steadily. People slowed their cars now as they passed Victor's house. Some did it out of curiosity, others out of something closer to respect. The wall didn't look like a tantrum. It looked deliberate, thoughtful, permanent in its purpose, even if everyone understood snow itself never was. Victor noticed the shift before anyone spoke about it. Neighbors who once hurried inside after parking lingered a little longer. Conversations happened at mailbox corners. People glanced from the wall to Karen's house, then back again, quietly connecting dots they hadn't wanted to see before. The HOA plow did not dump snow on Victor's land again. Instead, it hesitated. The driver slowed near the cul-de-sac, lifted the blade higher than before, and deposited snow farther uphill, closer to the HOA's own designated areas. The routes changed, not officially, just subtly. Victor documented that too. He wasn't trying to trap anyone. He was letting patterns reveal themselves. Karen, however, was not someone who tolerated quiet resistance. The following Monday, printed notices appeared on doors throughout the neighborhood announcing a special winter operations review meeting. No agenda was listed. Victor received his notice last. Ellie read it at the kitchen table, brow furrowed. "That sounds serious," she said. "It's meant to," Victor replied. The meeting was held in the clubhouse, a squat building that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and old coffee. Folding chairs were arranged in neat rows. A table at the front held clipboards and printed packets. Victor arrived early and took a seat near the back. He didn't bring Ellie. This wasn't her burden. Karen stood at the front, posture straight, expression composed. The red scarf was gone. She wore a neutral sweater now, professional, controlled. She waited until the room settled. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "We're here to address recent developments that may impact community safety and harmony." Victor listened without reacting. Karen spoke about winter challenges, about shared sacrifice, about how individual actions, however well-intended, could have unintended consequences. She never said Victor's name. She didn't need to. Then she mentioned unauthorized snow structures. Murmurs moved through the room. Victor waited. When she finished, Karen looked out over the chairs. "If anyone has questions or concerns, now would be the time." Silence followed. Not the awkward kind. The thoughtful kind. Finally, a man in the third row raised his hand. Dave, who walked his dog every evening. "I've got a question," Dave said. "Why was snow being dumped on Victor's property in the first place?" Karen's smile tightened. "That's a misunderstanding," she replied. "Snow placement varies depending on conditions." Dave nodded slowly. "Because my driveway didn't get cleared twice last week, but the plow went past Victor's house 3 times. A few heads turned. Another hand went up. Mrs. Callahan, retired schoolteacher. "I saw that too," she said. "I thought it was odd." Karen cleared her throat. "Winter operations are complex," she repeated. Victor felt no urge to stand. The room was doing the work for him. Someone near the back asked about the cracked retaining wall behind Karen's garage. Another mentioned water pooling downhill during the last thaw. Karen's answers grew shorter, more defensive. When the meeting ended, no resolution had been announced, no vote taken. But something had changed. People didn't rush out. They talked, quietly, intently. Victor left without speaking. The following week, a mild thaw set in. Sunlight softened the snow by day. Nights refroze it into dense, unstable layers. Victor watched the meltwater behave exactly as he'd predicted. His wall-guided runoff cleanly away. Across the line, pooled water seeped into cracks behind Karen's garage. Victor photographed that too. He didn't share it. Yet. The HOA sent another notice. This one warned of possible fines for structures affecting drainage. Victor responded with a single sentence. Please advise how a structure fully contained on my property violates Section 6.4 when repeated snow dumping did not. No reply came. Instead, a board member named James Downey knocked on Victor's door one evening. James looked tired, not angry, just worn down. Can we talk? He asked. Victor invited him in. They sat at the kitchen table. Coffee steamed between them. James didn't accuse. He asked questions. Victor answered calmly. He showed documentation, photos, logs, maps. James nodded more than once. This should have been handled differently, James said finally. Yes, Victor agreed. Karen did not attend the next informal board discussion. 2 days later, the HOA plow route was officially revised. The wall remained untouched, but the pressure didn't disappear. It shifted. Karen sent one more message to the board, this one forwarded to Victor accidentally. It complained about loss of authority, about setting a dangerous precedent, about how allowing one resident to defy winter policy would undermine governance. Victor read it once, then archived it, because authority that relies on ignoring reality never lasts. The first serious warning came from nature. A warm afternoon followed by a sudden freeze caused a loud crack behind Karen's garage. Neighbors heard it. Someone took photos. By morning, a visible fracture ran across the retaining wall. Victor saw it from his window. He sighed. Not with satisfaction, with concern. That afternoon, he printed a short report. No accusations, no blame, just facts, snow load estimates, water saturation levels, risk indicators. He walked it across the street himself. Karen opened the door halfway. I'm not here to argue, Victor said evenly. This is a courtesy. She took the folder reluctantly. You're enjoying this, she snapped. No, Victor replied. I'm trying to prevent something worse. She shut the door without another word. The next storm arrived 2 days later. Heavy, wet, relentless. Victor watched as snow accumulated rapidly, most of it now redirected uphill, exactly where it shouldn't have been stored. His wall held. Karen's retaining wall did not. By dawn, it bowed outward. By midday, the ground behind it shifted. By evening, the sound echoed through the valley. A deep, hollow groan followed by a sudden collapse. Snow, water, and debris surged forward, flooding Karen's garage. No one cheered. No one celebrated. They watched, and they understood. The HOA board convened quietly the next morning. Karen did not attend. The plow routes were suspended pending review. Winter operations were reassigned. And for the first time since Victor moved to Ridgepoint Valley, the HOA stopped issuing warnings and started asking questions. The wall stood, silent, unmoving, not as an act of defiance, but as proof. The morning after the collapse arrived without drama. No sirens, no shouting, no crowds, just the soft scrape of boots on icy pavement and the low murmur of neighbors speaking in careful voices. Victor stood at his kitchen window, coffee untouched in his hands, watching the scene across the cul-de-sac. The garage behind Karen's house had partially given way. Not in a spectacular explosion, not in a violent rush. It had failed the way overloaded things usually did, slowly, heavily, without apology. Snow and debris filled the space where tools and storage bins had once been stacked. Water pooled along the concrete floor, already beginning to freeze again as the morning temperature dropped. Victor didn't feel satisfaction. What he felt was recognition. This was exactly how it had always been going to happen. Ellie joined him quietly, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. Is she okay? She asked. I don't know, Victor replied, but no one was hurt. Ellie nodded. That seemed to matter most to her. By mid-morning, the HOA board members arrived, not together, but separately. No uniforms, no authority in their posture, Just concerned neighbors walking carefully around something they no longer understood how to manage. Victor didn't go outside. He didn't need to. The wall did its work in silence. James Downey arrived later that afternoon. This time, he didn't knock. He waited at the edge of Victor's driveway, hands in his pockets, staring at the wall as though seeing it for the first time. Victor stepped out. James turned. "We should have listened sooner," James said. Victor nodded. "Maybe." They stood there a moment, two men watching winter settle into its next phase. "We're calling an emergency board meeting tonight," James continued. "Not public, just internal." "That sounds wise," Victor said. James hesitated. "Karen won't be there." Victor didn't respond. Inside the clubhouse that evening, the tone was very different from previous meetings. No podium speeches. No prepared statements. Just tired people sitting around a folding table, staring at photographs spread between coffee cups and notebooks. Karen's snow management notes were reviewed. The plow routes, the deviations, the lack of written authorization. Questions arose quietly. Why had snow been redirected uphill? Why had private property been used without consent? Why were complaints answered with warnings instead of corrections? No one raised their voice. They didn't need to. The answers were written plainly enough. Karen submitted a written explanation the next day. It cited best judgment, time pressure, operational necessity. But it also revealed something else. Decisions made alone, without votes, without documentation. The board didn't argue with her. They didn't need to. They reassigned winter operations immediately. They issued a neighborhood-wide notice, not of punishment, but of change. It acknowledged errors. It promised review. It apologized without naming names. That apology mattered more than Victor expected. Neighbors stopped by his yard over the next few days. Not to gossip, not to congratulate, to talk. Mrs. Callahan brought soup, said it was cold weather food and didn't elaborate. Dave lingered with his dog and admitted he'd been uneasy for months, but hadn't wanted to cause trouble. Victor listened. He didn't say much. Karen did not come outside. For 3 days, her house remained dark. Then a contractor's truck arrived. They assessed the damage, shook their heads, took photos. Word traveled, quietly. The structure wasn't safe. Repairs would be expensive. Insurance was uncertain. None of it surprised Victor. Karen finally appeared on the 4th day. She stood at the edge of her driveway, staring at the wreckage as though trying to understand how something she had controlled for so long could simply stop obeying her. Victor didn't wave. She didn't look his way. Later that week, the HOA released another notice. This one announced a full review of association practices, budget oversight, decision authority, resident input. Karen's name did not appear, but her role did. Treasurer position under reassessment. Winter operations permanently removed from individual discretion. Transparency committee forming. Victor read it once, then set it aside. Ellie noticed the change in him. "You seem lighter," she said one evening as they ate dinner. "I feel finished," Victor replied. That night the temperature dropped again. The wall groaned softly as ice contracted. Victor checked the channels once more, clearing a small blockage where leaves had frozen in place. He worked carefully. He wasn't guarding a weapon. He was maintaining a boundary. Karen resigned 2 weeks later. The letter was brief. Personal reasons. Desire to step away. No admission. No apology. The board accepted it without comment. The neighborhood reacted quietly. No celebration. Just a sense of release. New people stepped forward to help. Not power-hungry ones. Careful ones. People who asked questions before making decisions. Winter continued. The wall stood. Spring crept closer. One afternoon, as the sun softened the snow and water traced familiar paths down the channels Victor had carved, Ellie sat beside him on the porch. "Do you think she hates you?" she asked. Victor considered. "No," he said finally. "I think she hates being wrong." Ellie nodded. That made sense to her. The HOA never fined Victor. They never demanded the wall's removal. They didn't need to, because the problem had already resolved itself, not through force, not through humiliation, but through exposure and accountability. The kind that doesn't shout, the kind that stays. When you're ready, say, "Rewrite Section 6, and I'll deliver the final section. Quiet resolution, dignity preserved, and justice completed without cruelty." Rewrite Section 6. Here is Section 6, fully rewritten, expanded, and designed to close the story with calm resolution, dignity, and justice realized. It keeps the homeowner patient, the HOA realistically exposed, and the narrative satisfying for a 65-plus audience without courts or legal theatrics. Section 6, quiet justice, lasting balance. Spring arrived slowly, teasing Ridgepoint Valley with longer days and warmer sunlight. The snow retreated in quiet rivulets, tracing paths Victor had carved along the Great Divide. Each channel guided the water safely downhill, away from his house, away from neighbors. Every rivulet told a story of careful foresight, patience, and respect for what could have been lost. The wall, once a towering monolith of ice and snow, melted gradually, leaving only a faint green scar across the lawn. Where ice had held back chaos, grass began to push through, strong and resilient. The scar became a line of life, a subtle monument to diligence, not revenge. Ellie suggested flowers. Victor agreed without hesitation. They planted tulips along the boundary, deep red and pure white bulbs, deliberately chosen. A small act of beauty, a quiet mark of perseverance. Every day they watered them, watching shoots emerge as the valley transformed from winter to spring. In the soft morning light, the tulips swayed gently, bending with the wind rather than resisting it, exactly how Victor wished the neighborhood would respond to challenges in the future. Karen Langley never returned to the HOA. Word filtered through the cul-de-sac slowly. She had resigned from the treasurer position and had moved to another city, citing personal reasons and a desire for a fresh start. No one mourned her departure. Not because she had lacked influence, but because her influence had been misused. The board, finally free from her unilateral decisions, began to operate with transparency, including all residents in discussions and votes, instituting new checks to ensure no single person could endanger private property again. Victor observed the neighborhood, not with triumph, but with a quiet sense of completion. New guidelines were adopted, plow routes logged in detail, GPS tracked, verified by multiple board members. Private property snow storage was strictly forbidden without consent. Audits were conducted, budgets reviewed, and procedures rewritten. The community learned the lesson of careful oversight, accountability, and respect, not through drama, shouting, or confrontation, but through the undeniable consequence of inaction. Neighbors approached Victor in small ways. A thank you here, a nod there. Occasionally, a quiet conversation at the mailbox about what had happened. No one gloated, no one needed to. They had seen the result firsthand. Meticulous preparation had prevented disaster, while arrogance had left the HOA's oversight crumbling like the failed garage. Victor's relationship with the community shifted as well. James Downey continued his involvement on the board, but now with humility. Mrs. Callahan and Dave became regular volunteers for community projects, all keeping a careful eye on processes, ensuring lessons from the winter were never forgotten. Responsibility was no longer a word on paper. It became an ethos, practiced quietly every day. For Victor and Ellie, life settled into a new rhythm. Ellie spent afternoons in the yard, tending tulips, tending perennials, playing music that drifted softly into the open windows. She laughed freely, no longer pausing to wonder if the street might erupt in confrontation. Victor grilled dinners on the porch, sometimes joining neighbors who stopped to chat, their conversations measured, thoughtful, and respectful. Winter's tension gave way to the slow warmth of normalcy, grown from experience and reflection. Victor often thought of his wife, Sarah, during these days. He could picture her smiling at the careful planning, the patient resilience. She had always taught him that boundaries weren't just physical, they were moral. They weren't built for confrontation or vengeance, but to protect what was precious, to allow life to flourish within safe limits. Late one afternoon, as the tulips bloomed fully, Victor walked the boundary line where the wall had once stood. The soil was rich and dark from months of melting snow. He ran a gloved hand across the ground, feeling life beneath his fingers. The lesson was clear. Walls don't have to remain forever. Some are meant only to preserve safety until the right balance is restored. Then, slowly, quietly, they dissolve, leaving fertile ground behind. He looked up across the cul-de-sac. Karen's house stood quiet, unoccupied, the street still, yet alive with lessons learned. The HOA board meetings continued, but differently now. Discussions were collaborative, decisions shared. The previous atmosphere of unilateral control had been replaced with awareness and responsibility. Authority, when exercised rightly, protected the community. Abused, it collapsed. That simple truth had endured without need for escalation. Victor exhaled, the valley around him golden in the late afternoon sun. Ellie joined him, hands in her pockets, eyes tracing the soft curves of the former wall's line. "It worked," she said softly. Victor nodded. "Not because we fought, because we prepared." She smiled, wide and unguarded. "And because we were patient." He rested a hand on her shoulder. "And because we respected what really mattered." For the first time in years, Victor felt completely at ease. No lingering anger, no bitterness, only the calm understanding that the natural order of things, the truth, careful planning, and moral consistency had restored balance. Spring continued to unfold across Ridgepoint Valley. Birds returned to the pines. Water trickled in rivulets along paths Victor had designed to carry it safely. The community worked quietly to rebuild trust. Neighbors helped each other, consulted one another, and approached disputes with measured thought. And every morning, Victor would step onto the porch, coffee in hand, eyes on the valley, the tulips, the gentle slopes where snow had once threatened chaos. He understood, deeply and clearly, that boundaries, whether of property, responsibility, or conscience, were most powerful when built patiently, maintained diligently, and honored consistently. The Great Divide had done its work. It had endured storms, held its line, and dissolved when the balance allowed. What remained was stronger, soil enriched by winter's melt, tulips blossoming, and a community forever changed, not by confrontation or punishment, but by quiet consequence and steady moral force. Life in Ridgepoint Valley returned to its peaceful rhythm. But for Victor and Ellie, it carried a new clarity. Boundaries mattered, respect mattered, patience mattered. And when those things were aligned, justice followed naturally, silently, and completely. Winter would return one day, as it always did. Victor knew they would be ready. Not with fear, not with anger, but with wisdom, preparedness, and the quiet strength of someone who had stood firm and let the truth do its work. And in that knowledge, there was a peace deeper than any snowstorm, stronger than any wall.